Connecting. You'll know when we go live when I start. Sorry. Apologies. Good evening, viewers, and thank you for joining the Friends of Al-Aqsa discussion today. It's a very important discussion on Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill. Today's discussion is to introduce the bill and for everyone to take heart. Sometimes we're contacted from people saying, okay, what next? What's happening? When we contact our MPs, does it make a difference? Are people listening? Are the MPs listening? And this event is to show that all the lobbying that you're doing, the 185,000 people that sent their MPs an email through Friends of Al-Aqsa during May to ask for sanctions on Israel, the fact that over 300,000 people signed the government petition calling for sanctions, it feels sometimes as though we're not being heard. But I can tell you, people like Richard, people like Dahir and other MPs are listening, are upholding international law, and are willing to do so with our support. This bill is extremely important, and the bill looks at important aspects, which I'm going to hand over to Richard to go straight into, and then I'll fill in the gaps if necessary, and then obviously we'll bring Dahir. And Diana is running slightly late, so we'll add her in the discussion. But Richard, as a sponsor of the Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill, thank you very much for putting forward such an important bill, underlying the important role that the government has. And why did you propose the bill? Why did you sponsor such a bill?
Well, thanks very much, Shamil, and it's great to be with you all, and it's great also to be alongside Tahir, who is one of the newly elected members of Parliament from 2019. That people can be very excited about being elected to Parliament. He's been a strong voice on economic issues at home, but also a strong voice and a brave voice on international issues as well, including Palestine. And if anybody hasn't had the chance to check it out, I'd recommend that you look at the speech or watch the speech that Tahir made in relation to the war in Afghanistan, the 20-year-long war in Afghanistan. He made that speech when Parliament was recalled to discuss this issue in August. Why did I bring this bill? Why did I write this bill? Well, one of the reasons is I think it's very important that people understand that when the bombs stop dropping, when Palestine stops being on our news televisions in Britain, the occupation doesn't stop. The occupation exists day in, day out for Palestinian people, for Palestinian children, for the Palestinian communities. And that's why it's really important that we don't just offer our solidarity and our suggestions during periods of overt conflict and war, but that we offer our solidarity and support day in, day out as well. So that's one of the reasons that I brought this bill. But I want to start off, before I get into further detail of the Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill, I want to start off talking about what currently happens on arms sales to Israel. The British government continues to authorise arms sales to Israel, despite clear evidence that weapons of the type authorised for sale have been used in violation of international law. So this means that the UK is providing material support for Israel's illegal use of force. So how can the British government, as it does, claim to be supporting peace when in fact it is helping to arm Israel in this way? So it's time for the British government to place an urgent ban on all arms exports to Israel. And that's why I brought this bill, because without this, our government's talk of supporting peace isn't just empty rhetoric. The government is actually complicit in Israel's war on the Palestinian people. And this bill, the Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill, is about ending British complicity in Israel's persecution of the Palestinian people. So let's look at the scale of the exports. Since 2015, the government, our government, has licensed over £400 million worth of arms sales to Israel. That includes over £100 million on aircraft and drones, £20 million on bombs, grenades and missiles, over £4 million on armoured vehicles, and nearly £3 million on small arms and ammunition. And the use of these weapons is quite clear. These weapons are used in the war on the Palestinian people. F-35 warplanes made using British parts were used in Israel's latest war on Gaza earlier this year. That military assault, as people on this call will know, killed over 230 Palestinians, over a quarter of them children. It left thousands more injured, and it displaced over 90,000 people. Arms manufacturer Lockheed Martin says dozens, I quote, dozens of the warplane's key components are British made. But it's no one-off. This was the first time weapons and components made in the UK have been deployed in bombing campaigns in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, because a review by the government into the bombardment of Gaza in 2014 showed that this wasn't a one-off, showed that this year wasn't the first time, because this review by the government identified that in the bombardment of Gaza in 2014, 12 licenses for components which could be part of equipment used by the Israel Defense Forces in Gaza had been in place. Those licenses, those 12 licenses, included licenses for military radar, licenses for combat aircraft and tanks. The British government said at the time it would suspend some of its arms exports to Israel if hostilities resume in Gaza. But despite this, sales continued. And it was in 2009 that the then Foreign Secretary David Miliband said that the UK exported components were, and I quote, almost certainly, close quote, used in Israeli military attacks on the Gaza Strip, and this led to the suspension at the time of several export licenses. So we cannot allow this to continue to go unchallenged. Now is certainly the time to act. If not now, then when? How many people need to die? How many people need to be injured before action is taken? So what would the bill that I put together, the Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill, do? The bill would prohibit the government from authorising arms sales to Israel. The bill would prohibit the government from authorising arms imports from Israel. Why is this important? This is important because these weapons are often marketed as having been tested on the Palestinian people. How abhorrent is that? So the bill that I proposed would deal with that issue as well. The bill would also, I think this is important, establish an inquiry into the ultimate use of weapons that have been authorised for sale to Israel, which campaigners warn the government currently chooses to turn the blind eye to. I'm very pleased with the amount of support I've had for the bill. And I want to again congratulate Tahir, who was one of the first signatories to the bill. So he's classed as a sponsor of the bill because he was one of the 5 first MPs to put his name to the bill. My bill is also supported by the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, by War on Want, and by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So it was launched in Parliament, if you have a look, by a cross-party group of MPs. And the last time I looked, which was just before this meeting, 43 members of Parliament had signed the early day motion, which I've also put down, which is linked to the bill, which welcomes the bill, which shows support for the bill. So 43 members of Parliament from 6 different political parties, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, Plaid Cymru, SNP and ALBA, have all backed my bill so far. And I'd encourage people to continue to lobby their members of Parliament and ask them to sign my early day motion 300. That's early day motion 300. And the motion is simply called the Israel Arms Trade Prohibition Bill. It welcomes the introduction of the bill, which is due its second reading on the 10th of December. So I'd encourage people to ask their MP to sign up to early day motion 300. With 43 MPs from 6 different political parties, every backbencher really should put their name to this bill. So this bill that I've introduced to Parliament is just one part of what we need to secure justice for Palestine. It must be part of a wider campaign to end Israel's siege of Gaza, end its legal occupation of Palestinian land, its colonial settlements, its denial of the right of Palestinian refugees to return, and its violation of human rights and international law. It must be part of a wider package of action, including sanctions on goods that are produced in the illegally occupied territories and the recognition of the Palestinian state by the UK. I think it was back in 2014 that our Parliament in the UK voted to recognise the state of Palestine. Still, the government hasn't implemented the outcome of that democratic vote in our Parliament. It's time for our government to get into step with much of the world and actually recognise Palestine as a state, because Palestine has the right to exist and Palestine will exist. And in the meantime, we must do everything that we can to speak up for Palestinian men, women and children who are suffering day in, day out from the occupation. When I went to the occupied territories, I saw the checkpoints. I attended a military court where children are tried, often in a language that they often don't understand. And that can't be right. These human rights violations must end. The Palestinian people have the right to self-determination. But crucially, what we can do as people who live in this country is to get our government and put pressure on our government to put its own house in order. And that means stopping arms sales to Israel. We need to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia. We need to stop arms sales to Israel. We need to have a new foreign policy, in my view, more widely, a foreign policy that's independent and is based upon peace, conflict resolution and humanitarian aid. And we need to end arms sales, which result in the violation of human rights and the killing of innocent men, women and children in Palestine and elsewhere.
Thank you, Richard. That was a comprehensive overview of the bill. I'm going to go straight to Dahir because Dahir's got to leave at 7 o'clock. We're not going to go much past 7 o'clock. By the Diana, unfortunately, hasn't been able to connect, unfortunately, because of Wi-Fi issues she's having. So she sent her apologies. But Dahir, if you could explain why you sponsored the bill as well. And then I'm going to come back with a few questions, if that's okay. So you're on mute.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Richard. As a new MP entering Houses of Commons, no matter how seasoned you are, it's a task in itself. I'm grateful for the help and support and the guidance that we've received from people like Richard, who are there for us whenever we need him. And actually, it's like minds come together. So there's a lot of issues that we agree on, and I suppose it's that brings us together and keeps us together as well. I also want to begin by thanking the Friends of Al-Aqsa for the important work that they have been doing over recent months. I received literally thousands of emails from people expressing their solidarity with the Palestinian people, which the Friends of Al-Aqsa helped facilitate. The recent conflict between Israel and Palestine was sparked by the ongoing illegal occupation of Palestinian land by Israeli settlers and the ongoing process of evictions of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. The violence perpetrated against worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque was unjustified. Provocation by Israeli authorities, which kicked off a refreshed wave of violence by Israeli armed forces, which saw the bombing of Gaza in May, which kills hundreds of innocent people. And we know that the British provided technology, equipment, and weaponry which was used in killing of these innocent Palestinians. In fact, British arms export to Israel reached record levels in the last few years. From 2008, the value of arms licenses for export to Israel from the UK stands at around £501 million. £501 million is no small amount of money. The largest license related to military technology and components for aircrafts, helicopters, drones, as well as significant licenses for bombs, missiles, and grenades. It is clear, therefore, that the UK continues to profit from the unjustified use of military force against Palestinian civilians. Blood is on our hands as our aircrafts and weaponry continue to claim the lives of innocent people. The UK has an obligation not to export weapons to countries who use them to commit human rights abuses. And it is countries like Saudi Arabia that we need to include as well. And human rights abuses are being committed daily by Israeli authorities against the Palestinian people. The situation must stop, which is why I'm so glad to support the initiative made by my colleague Richard Bergen to bring a bill that will seek to prohibit arms sales to Israel. I see this as an important part of a wider strategy for achieving peace and justice for the Palestinian people. It is evident that without sanction, the Israeli government and the armed forces will continue to repress and kill Palestinian people. We need measures to sanction the Israeli government and armed forces to apply international pressure for peace. The arms trade is one such area where sanctions can and must be applied immediately. We must also demand that the Israeli government recognizes the state of Palestine, ends all evictions of Palestinians, and seizes all support for illegal occupation of Palestinian land. Ending arms trade with Israel is not just the right thing to do from a moral point of view, it is also an important political act which will add pressure for a just and peaceful resolution to the conflict in the region. Anything that anyone would bring forward in Parliament with regards to bringing an end to this dispute and having a resolution which is peaceful and ends the killing of innocent Palestinian people, I, along with my colleagues in Parliament, will not hesitate to support. It is a duty on us that I see that we owe it to the people of Palestine.
Thank you, Tahir. One of the questions I want to throw out, maybe it's Richard or Tahir, a lot of people have been messaging on the side saying and asking beforehand, so this is a bill, so what's the process? Like, how does it become legal? Is there another, the next reading? What's the actual process of making this practical?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. The way Parliament works is very strange. I'll be open and honest. I don't want people to become disillusioned. It's very unlikely, the way the parliamentary process works, that this piece of legislation will pass all the way through and become law, because it's something I've written, I've put down in Parliament. There is a process. Its second reading is on the 10th of December. But what this is really about, is putting increased pressure on our government to do the right thing. This bill, which is being drafted in cooperation with lawyers and campaign groups such as the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, if this legislation were put into law, then it would have the effect of stopping arms sales to Israel. It would have the effect of us not being able to purchase weapons from Israel. It would have the effect of the inquiry I've talked about. But looking at the arithmetic in Parliament, look in terms of the number of MPs from different parties and with different views, looking at the parliamentary process, it's very unlikely that this bill will make it all the way through and become law on the basis of my efforts, the efforts of Tahir and others. But what it's crucially going to do is shine a spotlight on this issue and show that there is a practical way forward. There is something the government can do. The government could legislate for it very quickly if they so wish. They could do it just like that. And through putting this legislation down, through bringing this bill, we're showing them the way to do it. We're showing the public it's not a mystery. This legislation as drafted would have this effect. There's nothing to stop, apart from the lack of political will, the government putting that into law. So I'd really encourage people to write to their MPs to get more than just 43 members of parliament from 16 political parties so far backing the early day motion attached to this bill. Let's get more and more MPs and let's raise awareness and raise pressure on the government to do the right thing. As I say, they talk about peace, but really they're complicit in the oppression of the Palestinian people because of the licenses that they're granting.
Yeah, because what you said about there not being political will, but there's definitely public will, as Tahir mentioned earlier. You receive thousands of emails through FOA regarding essentially ask for these sanctions. There's definitely the public will, but that political will isn't there yet. And from our perspective as campaigning organization, we would say, look, let's keep campaigning. As Richard said, this is what campaigning is. Don't give up. I mean, Tahir, would you say that you're receiving emails from constituents affect you? Do you read these emails? Do you pay attention to when constituents contact you?
Absolutely. It is important that they come in the volumes that I received. I read every single email that comes in. The staff then, in consultation with me, we draft a response and we send that out. But the draft has to be approved by myself, so I don't individually respond to each email, but the staff do on my behalf. But I actually read every single email that comes in my inbox, and I have been doing that ever since I got elected. Now, there was over 5,000 emails that I received on this issue alone during Ramadan. During iftari time, when I had my laptop on, seri time, early morning, not iftari time, seri time, every time an email comes, it was going ping, but it was going like a musical ping, 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 and it was almost non-stop. Now, that gives you the strength of feeling that people have on this issue. And it is important when the bill gets before Parliament and there is a vote on it, it is important to note who supports it and who votes against it, because it's those people that vote against it that work needs to be done on in terms of convincing them, in terms not only a moral duty, but it is illegal in the views of the constituents that we represent, in terms of selling arms at the level and the pace that this government is doing.
Absolutely. And Richard, I presume you would agree that it's important for constituents to email MP, because one of the responses we got from our volunteers and our supporters was, is it making a difference? Contact MPs, they don't seem to listen. MPs don't care. What can you say to activists and those who want justice for Palestine? Do they continue to contact you and other MPs? Does this make a difference?
Well, there are different types of MPs, aren't there? For example, Tahir and myself, even if we received 0 emails on this issue, we would still feel passionately about it and do something about it. Although, as Tahir said, the emails do give us additional strength to take the argument forward. But there are MPs, of course, who, unlike Tahir and myself, don't have a particular interest in this issue, maybe aren't interested in issues of international human rights and foreign policy, but they will certainly sit up when they see email after email coming into their inbox, raising an issue. So there's one thing that virtually all MPs like, it's being MPs, and they all do the numbers in their head. They imagine the majority is disappearing. So they need to listen, it's part of the democratic process, to what their constituents think. And people in our communities, whatever their background, so many of them feel so very strongly about this issue. And so it's vitally important that we need to campaign outside Parliament, with the big demonstrations that we saw for justice for Palestine and for an end to the bombardment of Gaza, but also that we focus our lobbying, in addition, on members of Parliament. So don't just look to Parliament alone for our activity. We must also protest outside Parliament and build as big a social movement as possible for justice for the Palestinian people. But ultimately, whilst it often does seem difficult, whilst it often seems as if the change that's needed will never come, I always remember that Nelson Mandela once said, everything is impossible until it's done. And I think the same is the case with the issue of Palestine as well. One day, the Palestinian people will have their state. One day, the Palestinian people will have justice and an end to the human rights abuses. And then you'll find it hard pressed to find an MP who didn't say they were arguing for that all along.
That's a brilliant way to end this discussion. Diana again sends out apologies that she couldn't connect. I'd like just to again thank Tahir, Richard, both of you for joining us on this important discussion and pushing it forward in Parliament. And as I said, I've had texts before this and during, people seeing you guys and having hope that, you know what, there are MPs in Parliament that are listening, but also there is hope. And that's very important, that people have hope. And I'm hoping that the words that people heard from you guys encourages people to continue to campaign. And as you said, it's not just in Parliament. We have to continue to build that broad coalition of support for the for Palestinian human rights. On that end, you know, talking about arms, that one of the biggest arms fair in the UK is taking place at the moment. We've got protests next Tuesday at 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock at the Excel Centre. So please, everyone, join us. But Tahir and Richard, again, thank you very much for joining this important discussion and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shamil.
Take care. Bye-bye.